The city of Chicago was alive with its usual chaos, blaring horns, bustling sidewalks, and the ever-present hum of activity. High above it all, in a sleek office overlooking the skyline, Nathan Sterling stood staring out the floor-to-ceiling windows. At 42, Nathan had climbed every rung of the corporate ladder, amassing wealth, influence, and a lifestyle that many envied. Yet, as his assistant buzzed in to remind him about his upcoming 45th birthday gala, he felt a familiar emptiness settle in his chest. The gala, an extravagant affair at the prestigious Art Institute of Chicago, was to be attended by the city's elite. Nathan had always treated such events as networking opportunities, a chance to secure deals disguised as pleasantries. But this time, something gnawed at him. He longed for something genuine, something unpolished by pretense. As if seeking an antidote, Nathan left his office early that day. On impulse, he wandered into a small diner a few blocks away, a modest place called Ella's Eatery. The warm aroma of coffee and pie greeted him as the cheerful chime above the door announced his arrival. "Sit anywhere you like, Hon," a voice called out from behind the counter. Nathan turned to see a woman, probably in her mid-30s, her blonde hair tied back in a loose ponytail. Her name tag read, Grace. Nathan chose a booth by the window, feeling strangely out of place in his tailored suit amidst the humble, homey atmosphere. Grace came over with a menu and a warm smile. "You're new around here," she said, setting a coffee cup in front of him. Nathan nodded, unsure how to respond. Small talk wasn't his strong suit. But as Grace poured his coffee, her easy demeanor and genuine kindness put him at ease. Over the course of his meal, a surprisingly delightful meatloaf, Nathan found himself engaging in a conversation unlike any he'd had in years. Grace spoke of her son, Charlie, a 10-year-old with a remarkable talent for the piano. "He's self-taught," she said, her voice tinged with pride. "We don't have much, but he practices every day on this old keyboard someone donated to us. He's incredible." When Grace pulled out her phone to show Nathan a video of Charlie playing a classical piece, Nathan was floored. The boy's skill was undeniable, and his passion shone through every note. Before leaving, on a whim, Nathan handed Grace an embossed invitation to his gala. "I'd like you and Charlie to come," he said, surprising himself as much as her. "I could use some real people there." Grace hesitated, glancing at the invitation with wide eyes. "Mr. Sterling, this is kind, but I don't think we belong at something like that." "You do," Nathan insisted, his voice uncharacteristically earnest. "Please." Reluctantly, Grace accepted. As Nathan walked out of the diner, he felt an odd sense of anticipation. For the first time in years, the prospect of his birthday didn't feel like an obligation. On the night of the gala, the Art Institute sparkled with opulence. Guests mingled under crystal chandeliers, sipping champagne and exchanging carefully rehearsed pleasantries. Nathan stood near the entrance, greeting his guests with his usual practiced charm, but his eyes kept drifting toward the door. Finally, they arrived. Grace, in a simple yet elegant dress, looked around nervously. Beside her, Charlie clutched her hand, his suit slightly oversized but his expression brimming with wonder. Nathan's smile was genuine as he approached them. "Grace, Charlie, you made it. We didn't want to disappoint you," Grace said, her voice soft. She glanced nervously at the well-dressed crowd, clearly feeling out of place. Nathan led them into the grand hall, introducing them to a few acquaintances. While some were polite, others barely masked the disdain, viewing Grace and Charlie as curiosities rather than guests. Nathan noticed but ignored the subtle sneers and whispers. Charlie's eyes lit up when he spotted the grand piano in the corner of the room, its sleek black finish gleaming under the lights. "Mom, look," he whispered excitedly. "It's a Steinway." Grace gave his hand a gentle squeeze. I see it, honey, but it's just for decoration. Nathan overheard and felt a pang of sadness. Here was a boy with an undeniable gift, and the instrument that should have been his stage was merely a prop. As the night went on, Nathan found himself gravitating toward Grace and Charlie. Their authenticity was a refreshing contrast to the shallow conversations surrounding him. But not everyone shared his sentiment. The murmurs grew louder, culminating when one of his wealthiest investors, Victoria Langley, approached with a saccharine smile. Nathan, darling, she drawled, her tone dripping with condescension. Your guests are quite unique this evening, but perhaps it's time to focus on more important matters. Before Nathan could respond, Charlie tugged on his mother's sleeve. Mom, please, he whispered, nodding toward the piano. Grace looked mortified, shaking her head. Charlie, no. But Nathan intervened. Actually, Victoria, he said, his voice carrying across the room, I think it's time for some real entertainment. He turned to Charlie. Would you play something for us? The boy's eyes widened in surprise. And Grace protested. Mr. Sterling, he couldn't. Please, Nathan insisted, his tone gentle but firm. Consider it my birthday gift. After a long moment, Grace nodded reluctantly. Charlie walked to the piano, his small frame dwarfed by the massive instrument. As he sat down and placed his fingers on the keys, the room fell silent. The first notes of Beethoven's Moonlight Sonata filled the air, silencing every conversation and turning every head. Charlie's hands moved with a skill and emotion far beyond his years, captivating the room. Nathan watched the transformation unfold. The whispers ceased. The sneers turned to awe. And for the first time, the gala felt alive. But Nathan's gaze wasn't on the crowd, it was on Grace. Her expression was a mix of pride, sadness, and something deeper, a recognition he couldn't quite place. As Charlie played the final notes, the room erupted into applause. Nathan approached Grace, his curiosity growing. You're an incredible mother, he said softly, but I feel like there's more to your story. Grace didn't respond immediately. Her eyes were locked on the piano. And when she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. There is that piano. It's part of my story too. The applause still echoed through the hall as Charlie rose from the piano, his face glowing with excitement. Grace's expression, however, was far more complex. Nathan could see her hands trembling slightly as she clasped him together, her eyes fixed on the Steinway as if it held 1,000 memories she wasn't ready to face. Grace, Nathan said softly, stepping closer. What is it about the piano? You looked like you'd seen a ghost. Grace tore her gaze away and forced a small smile. It's nothing, she replied quickly. I'm just overwhelmed. But Nathan didn't believe her. He wasn't sure why, but he felt an urgency to understand. Something about the way she looked at that instrument told him there was more to her story than she was letting on. The rest of the gala passed in a blur. Guests congratulated Charlie on his performance, but some still whispered behind their hands. Grace remained polite but reserved, avoiding prolonged conversations. Nathan stayed close, ensuring they felt included despite the tension. As the night ended, Nathan offered to have his driver take them home. Grace initially refused, but after seeing how tired Charlie was, she relented. As they drove through the quiet streets of Chicago, Nathan decided to break the silence. You said that piano is part of your story, he began. What did you mean by that? Grace hesitated, glancing at Charlie, who had fallen asleep against her shoulder. She stroked his hair absently, as though the motion steadied her. It's not easy to explain, she said finally, her voice low, but it's connected to my past, my mother's past. Nathan waited patiently, sensing the weight of her words. My mother, Evelyn Monroe, was a concert pianist. Grace continued. She was brilliant, one of the best of her time. That Steinway was hers. It was custom made for her after she won a prestigious competition when she was just 20. She used it for every performance. Nathan raised his eyebrows, surprised. Your mother was a professional pianist? That explains Charlie's talent. Grace nodded but didn't smile. She was incredible, but the pressure of her career, it was too much. Constant touring, endless practice, critics who expected perfection every time. It consumed her. By the time I was Charlie's age, she'd already started to withdraw from the world. She walked away from it all when I was 12. What happened to her piano? Nathan asked. Grace's eyes grew distant. She sold it to pay off debts. I hadn't seen it since, until tonight. The revelation hung in the air like a heavy note. Nathan didn't push her further, sensing that the memories were painful. Instead, he turned his attention to Charlie, whose quiet snores filled the silence. You're an amazing mother, Grace, Nathan said after a moment. The way you support Charlie, the way you protect him, it's admirable. Grace looked down at her son, her expression softening. I just don't want him to go through what she did. I want him to love music, not feel trapped by it. Nathan nodded, understanding more than he expected. Maybe there's a way to balance it, he said, to let him thrive without the weight of expectations. Grace didn't respond, but her thoughtful expression told Nathan she was considering his words. The next morning, Nathan couldn't shake the conversation from his mind. He found himself thinking about Grace, about Charlie's performance, and about the piano that seemed to hold so much history. He reached out to his assistant, Mia, who had always been adept at uncovering obscure details. Mia, he said over the phone, I need you to find out everything you can about a Steinway piano that belonged to Evelyn Monroe. It would have been sold about 2 decades ago. See if there are any records. Mia didn't ask questions. She never did. I'll get right on it, Mr. Sterling. As he hung up, Nathan stared out his office window, wondering why he was so invested in this. Perhaps it was the look in Grace's eyes, or the raw talent in Charlie's music, or maybe it was the emptiness he'd been trying to fill for years, finally being replaced by something meaningful. Later that week, Mia called back with news. I found something interesting, she said. The piano was sold at an auction years ago, purchased by a private collector. It changed hands a few times before being loaned to the Art Institute of Chicago. That's how it ended up at your gala. Nathan felt a strange mix of excitement and disbelief. Do you have a contact for the collector? I do, Mia replied, but there's more. I found some old articles about Evelyn Monroe. There was speculation about why she disappeared. Some say it was because of a breakdown. Others mentioned financial troubles. But there was one piece that stood out. It suggested she left the industry because of betrayal. Someone close to her exploited her. Nathan's chest tightened. Who? The article didn't name names, Mia said, but it's clear that whatever happened left her broken. Nathan thanked her and ended the call. He couldn't ignore the feeling that this story was far from over. He resolved to dig deeper, not out of curiosity, but because he felt a growing responsibility to help Grace and Charlie confront their past. A week later, Nathan visited Ella's eatery, finding Grace behind the counter as usual. She greeted him with a smile, but he could see the lingering exhaustion in her eyes. Mr. Sterling, she said as he slid into a booth. What brings you back? Call me Nathan, he replied, and I came to see you and Charlie. Grace chuckled softly. Charlie's at school, but I'm here, so what's on your mind? Nathan leaned forward, lowering his voice. I've been looking into your mother's piano. It has an incredible history. Did you know it's now part of the Art Institute's collection? Grace froze, her hand tightening around the coffee pot she was holding. Why would you do that? Because I think it's important. Nathan said gently. You said that piano is part of your story, and Charlie's. Don't you think he deserves to know? Grace's expression shifted, her guard clearly rising. Mr. Sterling, Nathan, I appreciate your concern. But I don't want my past to define my son's future. Maybe it doesn't have to, Nathan said, but running from it won't help either. For a long moment, Grace didn't respond. Finally, she sighed and set the coffee pot down. You don't understand what it was like. Growing up in my mother's shadow. The expectations, the pressure to be perfect, it nearly destroyed her. I won't let it destroy Charlie. Nathan nodded, respecting her resolve. Then maybe it's time to take control of the narrative, he said, to honor her legacy in a way that's healthy for both of you. Grace didn't answer, but Nathan could see the conflict in her eyes. As he left the diner, he couldn't help but feel that he'd struck a chord, a subtle but important shift in her perspective. The cold Chicago wind swept through the streets as Nathan stood outside Ella's eatery. Watching Grace lock the doors for the night, she had agreed to meet him after her shift, reluctantly accepting his invitation to talk further about her mother's piano. With Charlie staying over at a friend's house, Grace had no excuses left to avoid the conversation. Where are we going? She asked as she slid into the passenger seat of Nathan's sleek black car. To the Art Institute, Nathan replied, glancing at her uncertain expression. Trust me. Grace hesitated but nodded, pulling her coat tighter around her. The drive was quiet, the tension between them palpable. Nathan could sense Grace's apprehension, but he knew this was a step she needed to take. When they arrived, the museum was closed to the public, but Nathan had arranged for a private visit. They were escorted into a dimly lit gallery, where the grand Steinway stood under a soft spotlight. Grace froze as soon as she saw it. Grace, Nathan asked gently, her eyes filled with tears. But she didn't move closer. I never thought I'd see it again, she whispered. It's exactly as I remember. Nathan stayed silent, giving her space. Slowly, Grace stepped forward, her fingers brushing the polished surface of the piano. Memories flooded her mind, her mother's hands gliding effortlessly across the keys. The haunting melodies that filled their tiny apartment, and the long nights when the music was replaced by silence. She used to say this piano had a soul. Grace said, her voice trembling, that it spoke to her in ways words never could. Nathan approached cautiously. And now it's here. It's part of your family's legacy. Grace. It's part of Charlie's story too. Grace turned to him, her face etched with pain. I don't know if I can do this. Facing it, it feels like I'm opening a wound that never really healed. Maybe that wound needs to heal properly, Nathan said softly, for you, for Charlie, and for your mother's memory. The next day, Grace found herself at the library, digging through archives and old newspapers. Nathan's words had stuck with her, and despite her fears, she felt compelled to learn more about her mother's past. What she found was both enlightening and heartbreaking. Evelyn Monroe had been a rising star in the classical music world, a prodigy whose talent was celebrated across the country. But behind the curtain of fame, she had been exploited by her manager, an unscrupulous man named Victor Langston. He had overworked her, mismanaged her finances, and pushed her to the brink of a breakdown. One article mentioned a public dispute between Evelyn and Langston just weeks before her sudden retirement. Another hinted at debts Evelyn had inherited from her late husband, which Langston had used to manipulate her into signing an unfair contract. Grace's hands trembled as she closed the last file. Her mother's struggles weren't just the result of external pressure, they were the product of betrayal by someone she had trusted. That evening, Grace shared her findings with Nathan. They sat in his penthouse, the Chicago skyline glittering outside the windows. She sacrificed everything to protect me, Grace said, her voice heavy with emotion. her career, her dreams, even her piano. And all because someone took advantage of her. Nathan leaned forward, his expression thoughtful. That makes what you're doing for Charlie even more remarkable. But it also makes me wonder, what if there's a way to reclaim her legacy? To turn her story into something positive? Grace frowned. What do you mean? I mean honoring her memory in a way that helps others. Nathan explained, setting up a foundation in her name. Supporting young musicians who might be in similar situations. You could ensure that no one else has to go through what she did. Grace stared at him, the idea both overwhelming and inspiring. I wouldn't even know where to start. I do, Nathan said with a reassuring smile. Let me help you. Over the next few weeks, Nathan and Grace worked tirelessly to establish the Evelyn Monroe Foundation for Musical Excellence. The foundation's mission was to support young, underprivileged musicians, providing scholarships, mentorship programs, and resources to nurture their talents in a healthy, supportive environment. Charlie was thrilled when he learned about the foundation, though Grace was careful to shield him from the heavier details of Evelyn's story. Nathan, meanwhile, began using his network to drum up support, rallying donors and prominent figures in the music industry. But not everyone was on board. Victoria Langley, one of Nathan's most influential investors, had been watching his recent activities with increasing skepticism. She didn't approve of his growing involvement with Grace and Charlie, viewing them as distractions from his responsibilities. When she learned about the foundation, her disdain turned to outright hostility. During a meeting at Nathan's office, Victoria confronted him. Nathan, this is madness, she said, her tone icy. Throwing money at some vanity project for a waitress and her son. What are you thinking? Nathan's jaw tightened. I'm thinking about making a difference. Victoria, something more meaningful than just making the rich richer. Victoria scoffed. You're risking your reputation, and mine, on this difference. Don't forget where your priorities lie. Nathan met her glare with calm determination. My priorities are exactly where they need to be. Meanwhile, Grace faced her own challenges. As word spread about the foundation and her connection to Evelyn Monroe, she found herself thrust into an unwanted spotlight. Journalists dug into her past, and whispers of her mother's struggles resurfaced. Grace tried to shield Charlie from the attention, but the pressure began to weigh on her. One evening, as they prepared dinner together, Charlie looked up from the table. Mom, are you okay? Grace forced a smile. Of course, sweetie. Why do you ask? Charlie hesitated. You've been sad a lot lately. Is it because of Grandma Evelyn? Grace knelt beside him, brushing a hand through his hair. A little, she admitted, but it's not your fault. I just want to make sure you're happy and safe. Charlie nodded, his young face filled with determination. I am, Mom, and I'm proud of you. Grace's heart swelled, and for the first time in weeks, she felt a glimmer of hope. The foundation's launch event was set to take place at the Art Institute, with Charlie performing on Evelyn's restored Steinway. As the day approached, tensions rose. Victoria Langley made no secret of her disdain, while Grace struggled with the emotional weight of the occasion. Nathan, however, remained steadfast, determined to see the event succeed. On the night of the launch, as Charlie sat at the piano and played the first notes of a piece Evelyn had written but never performed publicly, the room fell silent. The haunting melody filled the gallery, weaving a story of loss, resilience, and hope. As Grace watched her son play, she realized that this was the moment her mother's legacy had been leading to, not a tale of tragedy, but one of redemption. The launch event of the Evelyn Monroe Foundation for Musical Excellence was a resounding success. As Charlie's final note hung in the air, the audience erupted into applause, many wiping tears from their eyes. The haunting piece had captured not just Evelyn Monroe's struggles, but also her undeniable brilliance, channeled through her grandson's fingers. Nathan, standing at the back of the gallery, felt an unfamiliar pride swelling in his chest. This was more than just another event. It was a turning point, a moment that marked the reclaiming of a legacy and the start of something transformative. Grace, standing beside Charlie as he bowed, looked radiant despite the emotions flickering across her face. But not everyone was celebrating. Victoria Langley, unimpressed and seething with anger, wasted no time after the event. The next morning, she orchestrated a smear campaign against the foundation. Using her connections in the media, she planted stories questioning Grace's credibility and suggesting that the foundation was a vanity project funded by Nathan's misplaced affections. The headlines were brutal. From diner to dynasty, the waitress behind Chicago's latest philanthropic fiasco. Sterling's slip-up. Has wealth clouded his judgment? The backlash was swift. Donors began to pull out, worried about the negative press, and the foundation's future was thrown into doubt. Nathan was furious. He confronted Victoria in her office. His usual composed demeanor shattered. "How could you do this?" he demanded. "This isn't just an attack on Grace. It's an attack on everything this foundation stands for." Victoria leaned back in her chair, her expression cold and unmoving. "It's business, Nathan. You've let sentiment cloud your judgment. This little project of yours is a distraction, and it's costing you credibility." Nathan slammed his hand on her desk. "What it's costing is lives. Young musicians who could have had a chance to pursue their dreams. I won't let you ruin this." Victoria smirked. "Then I suggest you reconsider your priorities." Nathan left her office, determined to fight back. For Grace, the public scrutiny was overwhelming. Reporters camped outside her apartment, and every aspect of her life, her upbringing, her work at Ella's Eatery, even her relationship with Nathan, was dissected and judged. She began to question whether fighting for her mother's legacy was worth the toll it was taking on Charlie. One night, after putting Charlie to bed, she called Nathan. Her voice was shaky, exhaustion evident in every word. "Nathan, I can't do this anymore," she said. "The foundation, the press, it's too much. Charlie deserves a normal life." Nathan's heart sank. "Grace, don't let them scare you away. What we're doing matters." "I know it does," she whispered. "But at what cost?" Nathan paused, understanding her fears. "If you want to step away, I'll support you, but don't make this decision out of fear. Make it because it's what's best for you and Charlie." Grace hung up, her heart heavy. The next morning, Charlie surprised Grace with a bold declaration over breakfast. "Mom, I want to keep playing," he said, his small voice filled with resolve. Grace blinked at him in surprise. "Charlie, are you sure? With everything that's happened?" "I'm sure," he interrupted. "Grandma Evelyn didn't stop playing because she wanted to. She stopped because people hurt her. But you and Mr. Sterling are making it so that doesn't happen to me, or anyone else. I want to help." Tears welled in Grace's eyes as she hugged her son tightly. His courage gave her the strength she didn't know she still had. Determined to reclaim the narrative, Nathan and Grace decided to confront the media storm head-on. Nathan arranged a live press conference, inviting journalists, musicians, and community leaders to hear the truth directly from them. Standing together on the steps of the Art Institute, Nathan spoke first. "The Evelyn Monroe Foundation is not about me, or Grace, or even Evelyn herself," he said. "It's about the young musicians out there, kids like Charlie, who deserve a chance to pursue their passion without fear of exploitation or failure. Yes, this is personal, and I'm proud of that. Because the personal is what makes it real." Grace stepped forward, her hands trembling but her voice steady. "My mother's story was one of brilliance and heartbreak," she began, "but her legacy doesn't have to end in tragedy. Through this foundation, we are ensuring that her story, and the stories of countless other musicians, are about resilience, opportunity, and hope. Charlie, standing between them, added his own voice. I just want kids like me to know that music is something to love, not something to be scared of. The honesty and vulnerability of their words struck a chord with the audience. The media began to shift its tone, focusing on the foundation's mission rather than the manufactured scandals. The tide began to turn. Donations resumed, many from unexpected sources. Music educators, artists, and philanthropists rallied around the foundation. Inspired by its mission, Victoria Langley, meanwhile, found herself increasingly isolated as Nathan severed ties with her. The foundation flourished, launching programs in underserved schools and providing scholarships to young musicians. Grace and Nathan worked tirelessly, their partnership growing stronger with each challenge they overcame. Their bond, initially rooted in shared goals, deepened into something far more profound. Months later, the foundation held its first major recital, featuring young musicians who had benefited from its programs. Charlie played the closing piece, a duet with Grace on Evelyn Steinway. The room was filled with families, donors, and supporters, their applause thunderous as the final note faded. Nathan, sitting in the front row, felt an overwhelming sense of fulfillment. For the first time in years, he wasn't just successful, he was content. Looking at Grace and Charlie on stage, he realized that they had become more than just his partners in this mission. They had become his family. As the three of them stood together to take a bow, the audience rose to their feet in a standing ovation. This wasn't just a celebration of music, it was a celebration of resilience, redemption, and the power of hope.